The MP for South Northampton, Andrea Leadsom, says she'll write to the Transport Minister to ask for a review into the decision on HS2. The proposed high-speed rail link will cut across the south of the county, affecting several villages in her constituency. Yesterday, the government's admission that there were serious flaws in the bidding process for the West Coast Rail Line franchise, which led to 3 civil servants being suspended, campaigners for HS2 say has given them some heart that the business case for that particular project will be looked into as well. Andrea Leadsom is with me now. What exactly are you asking for from the Minister then?
I'm asking him to, first of all, give a comment on whether he thinks that this business case for HS2 now needs to be reopened in light of the fact that he is saying that officials have got their numbers wrong on the West Coast Main Line franchise. So on that basis, you know, what a number of us have been saying all the way through is that the business case simply doesn't stack up, that some of the inputs are wrong, the passenger forecasts are wildly over-exaggerated, and that some of the inputs around things like the value of time spent working versus not working on a train were completely wrong. So I do think, if there is now an admission that there's been a big problem with calculating future values and so on, then surely HS2, that is committing taxpayers to 32 billion of expenditure, has got to be a project that gets reassessed.
Is there any need for your intervention here, though? I mean, we were talking to the Stop HS2 campaign group yesterday. They say there's a legal challenge on the way for HS2 as part of that process. These things that you're asking will happen anyway.
Well, yes, I suppose that is a possibility. I mean, there's no certainty of outcomes with a legal challenge. And obviously, you know, what I want to do on behalf of my constituents is to make sure that I'm representing them. So, you know, I mean, there's completely no harm done with me writing to the Secretary of State and asking him for his thoughts.
It's a bit of a leap, though, isn't it, to assume that just because there were failings with 3 members of staff in a very large department on a completely different project, that there's also failings in the HS2 proposal.
Yes, I agree, and I've made that point in my letter to him, that it's not to suggest that just because one thing's wrong, everything's wrong. But the point is, this is a very significant project, and many people who've looked closely at the business case have found it to be flawed. And, you know, people with many years of experience in evaluating transport projects. So I think, you know, that question now does need to be answered.
I think that the problem for HS2 is that for every person there is arguing against it, there is a person backed up by an expert, backed up by consultants and analysts in favour of it, saying that the figures are right, even underestimated, and that it'll be great for the country.
That's not my sense of it, actually. My sense of it is more that those people who've looked at it closely are those who stand to be significantly impacted by it. And so, you know, clearly there's a large number of MPs who are not particularly motivated to look into the case because it doesn't affect them either for good or for ill. But it's those who've been looking closely at it because they don't believe that it offers the best case for taxpayers.
There are those who will be positively benefited, though, like West Midlands for HS2, that have looked at the business case, that put forward just as convincing arguments, as I say, in favour of HS2.
They absolutely put forward arguments in favour of it, but what they can't do is to answer the question on, for example, why the passenger forecasts are so overly optimistic, and issues like why is it that at the moment it's assumed nobody works on a train, and if HS2 were built, everybody would work on a train and everybody earns an average of £70,000 a year. I mean, those are clearly wrong assumptions.
Let's talk a bit about this whole process with HS2, but also with the West Coast Main Line. I mean, it's hugely embarrassing for the government, isn't it? A coalition government led by the Conservative Party, of which you are obviously a member. I mean, it's another U-turn for the government. It's becoming hard to trust anything that comes out of this government, isn't it?
Oh, well, you know, for a start, of course, it is not a U-turn. What it is saying that there has been some very fundamental errors, and therefore, as any normal human being would do, if you found errors, then you start again, don't you?
A bit of a U-turn on the West Coast Main Line, though, isn't it? Given the contract from Virgin to First Group and then taking it away from First Group.
No,
that's a U-turn, isn't it?
I don't know why you're pursuing that line. It is not a U-turn. Clearly, the basis on which the decision was taken has been found to be flawed. So it's not a U-turn, is it? It's saying the basis for the decision was flawed, so now we're going to look at it again. That is actually a very rational and sensible thing to do, and I'm quite sure most people in the country would agree. If you've made a bad decision on wrong facts, then you need to look at it again.
Do you agree that it is becoming increasingly hard to trust anything coming out of the government, the information on which any major decisions are based?
I think every decision has to be taken on its merits, actually, and obviously, as we said earlier, the fact that the West Coast Main Line has flaws in it doesn't necessarily mean that the HS2 case does. I happen to think there are problems with that business case. On the other hand, there are other projects that government puts forward that are perfectly reasonable and reasoned, and so I don't think that there's an issue that nothing the government does can ever be trusted. But what I do think is that one of the benefits of democracy is that people do get the chance to look at the information for themselves and to put forward challenges to it where they feel that it doesn't stack up, and that improves on the decision making.
And civil servants aside, do you think there are members of the government that have questions to be answered here? Justine Greening, for example, the former Secretary of State for Transport, who presided over the West Coast Main Line franchise allocation and the bidding process, and presided over and was a big backer for HS2. Do you think she needs to answer some questions?
Oh, it's hard to say, really. I think she was, as she has said, she was assured by civil servants that that there weren't any mistakes in the assessment, and that's that therein lies the problem. Is either you, as a minister, you have to second guess the work of your team and do everything yourself, or you have to accept their assurances at face value. I don't think that in this case that there's any evidence that Justine was deliberately, in full knowledge, deciding to go ahead anyway. Completely the reverse. And as soon as the new Secretary of State discovered that there were flaws with the calculations, he's absolutely come out and said so and put steps in place to make that that re-looked at, and I think that's absolutely the right thing to do.
And do you think the Transport Minister will take you up on your request, will order this review into the business case, the figures that back up HS2?
Well, I would say that the Department for Transport will now obviously be wanting to look at any key projects just to make sure that if there have been kind of assumptions that have been fundamentally wrong throughout the department, that they look again at the implications for any other projects. So whether that means a complete, new look at HS2, or whether it means that they just sort of go and check over the calculations, I'm quite sure the department will be very thorough in looking over what else may have gone wrong.
And just finally, the MP for Northampton South, Brian Binley, called the West Coast franchise situation yesterday on this programme a cock-up. Would you say the government are guilty of the same thing over HS2?
No, I don't. No, I don't think the government is, this is a very serious project with a design to change the railway infrastructure of Great Britain. So you can take a very principled view in favour of it or against it. But, what I'm looking at is the value for taxpayers' money.